Today we have Johnny Sirpilla. Johnny is an accomplished entrepreneur, author, and public speaker. He was a former president and chief business development officer of Camping World and Good Sam, an organization with over 10,000 employees and over $4 billion in sales. He retired from Camping World in 2017 after a successful IPO and has since started his family office, Encourage LLC. Johnny enjoys serving on the boards of various public, private, and nonprofit organizations. And Johnny has been married to his college sweetheart, Susan, for over 30 years and has 3 children, Bo, Bella, and Stone. Welcome to the show, Johnny.
Thanks for having me here, Michael.
Excited to chat. You have such a wide variety of experiences. And so I'm sure me and the listeners will learn a ton from you today. So let's start with, where did your career begin?
So my career began after undergrad at Miami University. I moved to Chicago for a brief stint. And then after being there only about a year and a half, I got a phone call from my dad that it was time to come home to the family business. And that was in the RV industry. And so my dad was one of the pioneer dealers in the industry in the 1950s. And then in the late 80s, he asked me to come and join the business. I was there at the business for just a few years before my dad ended up getting cancer. And by the time I was 28, I was president of the company and running it by myself and not having my dad there by my side. And so I had to learn quickly in my 20s. And my industry began in the RV industry. My career began, and I had really a great run for 30 years until the age of 50. I decided, now I'm a grown up. I can really do what I want to do. What is it that I want to do? And so I started Encourage.
I see. So let's dig into being 28, being in the position to take over the family business. Was that something you were passionate about with the RV industry? Were you excited about that? How were you feeling when that transition happened?
Well, I would say I'm not passionate about the industry the way that most people would say, where I wasn't an RVer, even though I was born and raised in the industry. My family, we weren't RVers, but it was a business to us, right? And so that idea, and I love that you even asked that question, because I do some talking about that so many young people are told, to follow their passion. And so you never have to work a day in your life, right? Find something that you love doing. I think that is not really great advice. I mean, of course, if it could work out, it's ideal. But what I found was an industry that I could connect to. And the way that I connected to the industry is RVs keep the families together. And I love family. And I'm all about family time. So I recognized that I had a product that could really promote family togetherness. And that was really something that I could be passionate about. And so providing the backdrop and the environment for the consumer to have their leisure time, their relaxation, and their time with family, that I was really passionate about. So I found my way to connect. And from there, it was just running a business. And then you become passionate about treating people well, and you become passionate about winning, and become passionate about being good stewards of the money that you're making and reinvesting in your company and building a strong company. That's where I think all the passion to me comes in. The actual product itself, any item could really get you to that same outcome of being passionate.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point that you make there, in the sense that you don't necessarily have to be passionate about the industry, the product, et cetera, but there are elements about your role in your work that you can become passionate about, and that starts to create a lot of meaning. So thank you for sharing that. And so you grew that business and eventually got acquired by Camping World. Can you tell us more about how did that whole situation happen?
As many entrepreneurs know, people running their business, I never thought about being acquired. It was nowhere on my radar at all. I was just passionate about running the business as successfully as I could and growing the company and creating financial security. And Camping World was launching in 2003, and I was one of the early acquisition targets. And they went out around the country and bought significant dealerships in each marketplace. And I represented the Midwest and then the Mid-South. And then I started doing acquisitions in those areas. And there were 7 of us that were purchased and then put in roles of divisional presidents to run regions and handle the M&A activity, doing acquisitions, and then running those facilities. So it was a super cool opportunity to take an industry that I knew really well. I was 36 years old at the time. So I had been doing it for about 14 years, 12 years maybe. And so I knew the industry really well. And then I was able to go out there and handle acquisitions and then bring them into the fold and then help run those. Pretty quickly over time, after about a year or so, I was moved to the executive VP of operations nationally over all the stores. And that really was a great opportunity to, bring standard practices to businesses all over and build nationally the various teams that would support all of those dealerships that we were buying and we built as well, which, went into over 200 stores.
A couple areas I'd like to dive a bit deeper into. So of all the RVs operators, why do you think you were one of the few that were initially acquired? What do you think made your organization different?
We had a very strong regional brand. RV dealerships, and many of them weren't national because there's so many across the country. And remember, this was back in the early 2000s. So the internet was impacting, online selling was impacting the industry a bit. But it was a strong reputation that we had in the industry with manufacturers, with the customer base. We were of significant size, retailing, a little over 1,000 units a year. And so we were in a good position, I think, to catch the national eye. I had also won the National RV Dealer of the Year competition. Out of about 3,000 dealers, was picked as the number one best operated facility in the country. And so that put us on the map as well.
Wow, that's massive. You should be very proud of that. And when it comes to switching your role to being on the Camping World side, then you said you started working on acquisitions. How did you develop the skills to start identifying what to acquire, since you were kind of just operating your own operations and now you're in a position where you're assessing other operations, acquiring them? How did you go about that?
Well, the business assessment part was easy, Michael, right? Because it was a business exactly like mine, just in a different state or a different zip code. So I was able to, assess the operation of the business pretty simply. Having the financial statements, being able to see the numbers, going through, talking to employees, you could really understand how proud they were, or maybe in some cases not so proud, the way that they ran their facility. So you could show up on a site visit and see their attention to detail, the cleanliness of the facility, the quality and condition of the units. All of that was pretty simple to be able to identify. The challenge, and the real challenge when you're doing M&A work, is the human capital component. Really looking for signs and cues from the sellers if they will be a good fit in the organization. Can they make that transition from a individual owner and the guy ultimately in charge to the guy or gal that's now working for a larger corporation? They have fully sold their business, but they wanted to stay on, and we wanted them to stay on. That's really kind of where the secret sauce was, is seeing who could, or anticipate, I should say, who could transition well into the role of an employee in an executive in a large national brand, right? That's where the challenge was. And so, oftentimes you might have a brand that you go in and you do the deal and you knew up front that it would be best if the owner didn't come with it, because maybe right below that owner, there was great talent that had been suppressed and pushed down by that owner because the owner maybe was a difficult individual to work with, even for their employees. So that dealer's own employees might have been happier when they were gone versus coming into an organization and fearing that many things would be changed. And then we had the opposite of that. Some that would never want to work for anyone else other than their owner because they were so impressed and they were treated so well. So really understanding that dynamic and realizing that if it didn't work with the owner, would you lose good talent that followed him or her out of the business?
Yeah, that is very interesting. And speaking of that transition for the owner into a larger organization, let's talk about what that was like when you went from operating your own business to being an executive within a much larger organization. What was that experience like?
So for me, I knew it was going to be good, and it was good. I knew it was going to be good because I love being part of a team. It doesn't have to be all about Johnny and everything that Johnny wants, even though when I was running my own business for all those years, everything fell back to me. It was my decision. Granted, I empowered my leaders to be able to make decisions, and I really wanted them to run their departments and do it. But ultimately, the decision came back to me, and I was very comfortable with that. But I love being on a team. And so that's the thing that excited me most about Camping World is joining others to create something nationally that had never been done before. And there was many that thought that we would never make it as a company because RVers would never buy from a national brand. They would only buy from individually owned mom and pop type operations. And so we really had the cards stacked against us in terms of what the success would be out there because they thought the consumer would not go with this national brand and want to do business that way. Turns out we provided a national service network, which is a real pain point in the industry, so that if somebody bought from one location, they could end up in another market and have, if they were having challenges with their coach, get taken care of and serviced in that location. So there were great benefits that we knew, but we had the media and those in the industry oftentimes just against us on that. So I went into it with the knowledge that it's not all about me. It's not ultimately my decisions. I was blessed to work my way into the number 2 spot in the company. And so with a great accomplished group of talented leaders all around me. And I accepted that there was somebody that could say no ultimately to something that I wanted to do. Did I always like it? No. Did I realize that there's a way to angle things and position them properly for the greatest chance of doing what you feel is right for the business? Yes. I understood that I had the ability to do that if I presented things well. And so some, I would say, couldn't get over the idea of someone else having thoughts or insight different than theirs. And so they couldn't transition into an executive in a large company. And their time with us was short-served. Where I looked at it as, let's all work together. Let's find great ways of doing things. Let me, seek to understand and keep my ears open so that I could really understand maybe some things that I wasn't doing well that I need to improve upon. And so I really embraced that.
And so an analogy I would think about with that transition is like going from playing in college to now you're in the pros and you're in a much larger arena. What were some of the skills you had to consciously develop?
So when you're running a company on a national scale and you have hundreds of locations across the country, leading from a distance, right? I was used to going into a facility every morning into my dealership, and I would be there from bell to bell. You're there 5-6 days a week, and you're engaging. You're seeing things with your own eyes. You're talking to the employees. You're talking to your managers and your leaders, and you're right there with them. When you're leading on a national scale, and this was before the time of Zoom and being able to have video meetings, we did have conference calls. That technology was certainly around in the early 2000s, but it was a new way of leading and a new way of assigning tasks and responsibilities and figuring out how to inspect what you expect when you might not be at that facility for another 2 years, because there's so many in the country that you talk about things getting done. So you're sharing images or asking to have videos shared, or just a daily standard of cleanliness in the way that each coach is presented on the lot. You're not there to see it. And so one of the ways that I led my organization was I wanted to go see a unit after it was detailed and cleaned to see if it met the standard that I had for it, to see if it smelled okay, right? And to look for, any opportunities that we can have to improve it so the customer had a better experience. Well, when you're running a company from a distance, and we had large retail stores inside each dealership, with tens of thousands of SKUs inside those stores, to see how that's merchandised and what the shelf presentation was. Even though that you have planograms that show exactly how it should look and images that are sent out to the stores, doesn't mean it always looks that way. So coming up with ways to lead from a distance and still ensure high standards was something that I really liked the idea of it. It was challenging, and you had to be creative at times. So it's important to be able to make an impact from a distance.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point that you bring up when the technology wasn't quite to the level it is now and managing remotely nationally. And so thank you for sharing that experience. So Johnny, 2016 rolls around. It must be a very exciting year. Camping World goes IPO, goes public. Can you share with us, how did that feel? What was that experience like?
No, Michael, it was the culmination of 15 years of work and dreams of getting to the point of being of scale and large enough and meaningful enough where the New York Stock Exchange would allow us to hit the market. And so it was a great experience. It was really the culmination of a lot of hard work by the executive team to work over years to get us in that position. And it was probably, being there that day on the stock exchange floor, seeing the level of finance so high, seeing the rollout, the launch of the stock come out strong and above where we thought the threshold would be, all good things. I mean, it was exciting. But at the same time, we were entering into an entirely new landscape of the public market. So you realize that, some things really need to change for the better, always to, when you have public funds involved there, it's a different ballgame. And so we accepted that challenge and we're ready for it. And the team worked really hard for it. So it was a great time in my career.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's very exciting. I think something that many people dream about. And so in 2017, you decide to shift gears in your career. Can you walk us through, how did you make that decision? Because from the outside, it may look like everything's just green lights along the way, right? And you get to the milestone, your company that you're number 2 in goes public, but then you're able to make that decision to walk away. Because I think one of the traps that many people fall into is the more success you get, you keep moving that goalpost and you keep moving that goalpost. And so help us kind of understand, how did you come to the point where you realized enough was enough and you decided to make that right turn instead of left?
I'm a believer in seasons of life. And so for me, the IPO did happen, ironically, on my 50th birthday. And so it was, the start of a new decade for me, literally that day. And I just felt that my time there serving was done. I felt that I had been there fulfilling the purpose that I was meant to do, and that really God put it on my heart that there's other things that it's time for me to go do. Exactly what that was, I don't know. I didn't know at the time. But my mind was stirring and wondering, is this all I'm going to do? And if the answer to that question was yes, all I'm going to do is stay in the RV industry my entire life, that's all good. That was fine. The money ahead of me was a fortune. I mean, those were the years where, I was going to continue to be able to really be successful. It's just that my heart was starting to wonder, and my mind was wondering if it was time for something new to challenge me. And so I made the decision to leave. I call it one of the most selfish decisions I've ever made in my life, because I cared so much about the people that I was working with. I cared so much about the organization, but just really felt that my time there was done.
And how did you transition into discovering or finding your next purpose or mission?
And that was a little hard, right? Because so many of us identify as the role that we had served. And I had been an executive in that company for so long. And, you have the responsibility and the blessing of thousands and thousands of employees. You have the respect from so many people, in many cases, far before you've earned it from them, but your title puts you in that position. And then it's really my job from there to earn someone's respect after that. But I'll tell you, it was a time of just soul searching of what impact do I want to make? And so who do I want to work with and spend time with? And what do I want the outcome of that work to look like? And so for me, I started spending time thinking about what's the best way to do that. Board service ultimately became my answer to that. I wanted to serve companies on the public sector, in the private sector, and I had already served many organizations in a volunteer way. I chaired the United Way board in our community and chaired the campaign and chaired giving out the money. And so I was very involved in the community earlier on. Spent 13 years, matter of fact, volunteering for United Way. And so I knew what board work looked like in a large organization with strong community leaders. And I had the blessing to serve as chair there. So I knew that board work was likely where I wanted to spend my time, being influential, making an impact where it's now time for someone else to do the heavy lifting. And it's my role to assist and guide and provide thoughtful questions and challenges to them in ways of looking at things that I had experienced in the last 30 years of my career.
And Johnny, what you went through, saying that you got to a point where you felt like maybe your heart wasn't in it and what you had been doing up until this point, or you wanted some sort of search, right? There was something pulling you towards something else. And so I think that's probably a common thing many people experience at some point in their career. However, you made the decision to leave first and then search and find second. Was that something you purposely decided? Because I would imagine a lot of people, they'll just stay in their job or their occupation while they're starting to think about, okay, what might be next for me? So can you share your experience around how you kind of thought through or navigated that and how others may do the same?
For me, I'm all in on something. And so I was really not able to lead in that capacity, in that big of a role, and have my business interests be somewhere else. And so it was pretty clear to me that the right thing to do, and the hard thing to do, is step away from the money, step away from the stock. I mean, all those things that you're walking away from, what I was walking to wasn't as guaranteed as what I was leaving. Right. And so that's when, you challenge yourself with the question of how much is enough? At what point do we continually financially feel that we need more? At what point can we be content? And I think all of us have different thresholds for that. I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. It's very personal. And for me, I felt content. And so I was willing to take the gamble and say, I'm going to give up this known incredible opportunity and the money that went with it to just go explore and see what's out there. And then, as I did that, and then many people, I'm sure so many of your listeners have such great skill sets and reputations with them that many opportunities, they just started opening up. And so it really wasn't that hard to find, truly at all. It was, opportunity after opportunity presented itself. And then it's a matter of maybe not overcommitting. And I've had the time over the last 6 years where my plate is far, far too full. And I wanted to write a book, which I know we're going to talk about later, but I needed to free some things up because I didn't have time to write the book. And so, it's kind of that ebb and flow after that, where you're controlling your own schedule, but I didn't have thousands of employees that I needed to worry about in that case. Right. And so it's really kind of being a solo guy there at that point and just looking out for my family and what was best for us.
Going back to the idea of knowing when enough is enough, did you personally have a number in your head that you said, hey, that is, financially is enough? Or was it a certain lifestyle or the way you lived each day? Or how did you define that to yourself of when you knew enough was enough?
Well, I think the financial side of all of us, we can attach a number to it. And I did that a number of times and kept raising the number.
Yep.
And then what I realized, Michael, in doing that was it really wasn't that number, because it was more of me proving that I'll never be satisfied with what I have until I finally admit that it's enough. And so every time I reached that new plateau, all I did was raise it. And so finally I had to say, you're not going to play that numbers game anymore. And you're just going to now prioritize what's more important. If it's the money versus something else, okay, just own that and say it's the money. And so I'm going to keep working for the money. I chose not to do that and said, okay, this is enough. So there is a financial component to it. But then there's also the component to it of impact. What is enough impact that you want to make, and on what stage in other arenas? And that's where I started challenging myself to think there's more that I wanted to do. And while I was still doing meaningful work, were there other audiences that I wanted to impact? And that's kind of really where my heart went. And that's why I thought, it was time. But it's a really personal decision. It's a tough decision. I was in a very blessed position to be able to make that decision at that age, but it comes with a lot of challenges after. You challenge and question your purpose. I think, we all thought at one point, I kind of never wanted vacations to end because we were having such a great time. But if you're not working full time and having that purpose every day, there is only so much downtime, at least for me, and at that age, at the age of 50, that I could feel was relaxing versus boredom and lack of purpose, right? And so, the older I get, the more relevance I understand to the idea of purpose and how I want to be purposeful every day and making a difference to fill up my own soul, right? It's not just about doing what I enjoy. There's that giving back component. And so if anyone listening is on the verge of that repurposing event or retiring event, really think about, that's why I use the term repurpose, really think about what that purpose is that you're going to do. And maybe for a while, your purpose is relaxation and taking care of your mental health and your physical health. That's an angle of it that really needs to be considered.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think regardless of where you're at in your career, it's important to at least sit down, take the time to think about that concept of when is enough, and start thinking about what are other aspects of your life that you want to make sure you tackled before, it's essentially over, right? So I think that's very important to be intentional about that.
And the enough is enough. I want to touch on that one more time. It's not just about the finances of when is enough is enough. Mm-hmm. The mental health. If you feel tasked at work where your mental health is being challenged, when is enough enough? When is the time that you say, my self-care is more important to me than this paycheck? And then really thinking through, if you give up a big paycheck for a small paycheck, how's that going to impact your mental health, right? So it's not just trading out problems or options and thinking, okay, I can walk away from it and then everything will be fine. You really got to think of all angles of it. But when is enough for our family? I wanted to be more present for my family. So that was a enough is enough component. And the mental health was that component. And the purpose was that component, right? So there's a lot of sides of that I think somebody should really thoughtfully look into.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things I personally do is think about what are my non-negotiables? What am I not willing to give up in exchange for the time I'm spending in work? And then I have my work fit within those constraints. That way I'm making sure I'm giving time and priority to the areas of my life that I really care about.
That's right.
And so next I want to talk about you've obviously had a very successful career, and I would say a very successful personal life, family life. I've really enjoyed reading your book. I'm curious, what are some of the most important skills, and that can be related to anything, that really attributed to having a great life?
Prioritizing is the first thing that comes to mind, is that, I made it a priority professionally to give of myself fully to the company and make sure that I was many times giving the company more than I was taking back. And I really, took that as an honor with the role I had to be as a leader to ensure that I was really pouring into other people and being impactful as a leader and caring genuinely about their success. I saw it that my job every day coming to work was to make other people successful. And when I made them successful and poured into them and made sure that they had the tools that they needed to be successful, which many leaders demand success and results out of an employee, but doesn't give them the right tools inside the company to achieve those goals. And so they are, very one-dimensionally looking at something. They look at the result that they want, but don't even acknowledge that the employees don't have the tools that they need to deliver that result. And so when I'm going to focus on making someone successful, I got to make sure that I surround them with the right people. I surround them with the right technology. I surround them with the right support system and logics and all those things that result in the end product of success. So, that was a skill set that I really had to make sure that I had my mind set on when I come to work every day. Is it to accomplish my tasks, or is it to do that, but then ensure that others are successful in accomplishing theirs? So that's an important piece that I always like to touch on. The other piece is, being relatable and likable. As a leader, Michael, every now and then you need to stop and turn around and look to see if anybody's following you. To think that people are going to follow you just because you have the title. Those titles have, temporary respect associated with it, right? Because you take that title away from someone and, you really might have no respect for them left. Yet when you think about those coaches in your life or those teachers that had, authority over you and were impactful to you or meaningful to you, you look at them very differently. And 30 years later, you might see that coach and say, "Coach, how are you?" You still give them that title because you want to show the impact and influence that they had in your life. And so I think there's a difference between, the title that you have and the authority that you have over people and the impact that you can make. And so the influence, if you will, maybe that's another word over authority, is the influence that you have. So that's a really important skill set to develop, is that connectability with people. And I talk about the importance of likability at work. Don't underestimate that, two people with similar skill sets, one is genuinely more likable to be around. They're happier. They're more willing to take on more work. They're more willing to engage with other people. But two matching skill sets, someone's likable and someone's challenging to be around. Who would you rather work with? Right? And people should understand. And I've had those conversations with people at times over the years. Let me tell you why you didn't get this role. Is it because of talent? No. It's because you're difficult to be around. It's because your view of the world and the negativity that you put out there constantly is tough to be around. And you're a drain on the energy in the organization. And quite honestly, we can't let that continue to happen. So you did not get this promotion because you don't have the skill sets or the institutional knowledge. It's because you're difficult to be around. And now a leader can't allow that person to stay in that role once they acknowledge and realize that they're difficult to be around. You either need to coach them up or out, because letting them in there just because they're getting the job done negatively impacts the culture and everyone around that person. So when they see that difficult person's career rewarded with longevity, it's a clear message to everyone under that level of employment that that's acceptable standard of work to be difficult. And it will encourage and breed that in the organization.
Thanks for sharing that. And so now let's move on to a topic I know you have a lot to talk about and a lot of experience around, and you've hinted at throughout this podcast, is around leadership. What do you think are, in addition to what you said just now, is what skills do you think are important for someone to be a successful leader, and how can individuals develop those skills throughout their career?
I think to be a successful leader, you need, first and foremost, Michael, you need to care about it. You need to really want to be a positive influence on the people that you're leading. It's different, what I said, than really wanting to do a good job and make a lot of money and have a lot of power. It's very different. I'm not saying that. I'm talking about really caring about the people that you're leading and how can you make the organization better for them so that the organization can first and foremost meet its mission. And in the process of doing that, you could positively impact the people that are your human capital making it happen. So for me, starting out with caring is really, really important. And there are some leaders that will honestly admit that they don't care about the employees. They don't care about working conditions. They care about results. They care about the finances. And those are really important things. Results and finances are important. But I ask you, at what cost? And so the first place I always start is do you care enough? And you can tell when I've asked that question of people that they never thought of it. Their answer and the way that they're almost shocked by the question shows that their heart really isn't at a place of servant leadership, where leadership is influence. They're not thinking that way. They're thinking about leadership means power. It means a bigger paycheck. It means control. And that's dangerous to go down that path.
Yeah, absolutely. I heard you in another interview say that insecurity is at the root of internal and external conflict. Can you share more about that?
Yeah, I quote that comment that I recognize a lot. I'll just restate it. Insecurity is the root cause of all workplace conflict. Anytime I saw conflict at work, you can just look at the situation and look at the opposing views. And so many times it was not that they fundamentally each didn't care about the organization, or they fundamentally disagreed on the way to get it done. Where their focus is some level of insecurity that if we go down option A path, I'll lose control. And if I lose control, I don't operate as well and play in the sandbox as well when I'm not in the control position. So I'm going to argue for option B and go down that path because I remain in control there. And my insecurity is loss of control. Or someone going down the path, fighting for something, and you think, why are they holding on to this so much? It's the right business move to move it from her scope of control over to hers over here. Why is she holding on to that so much? It's the insecurity of losing responsibility. How does that look to others that this was taken from me and assigned to someone else? Right? And so her belief and her argument on why it should stay with her isn't rooted in what's best for the company. It's rooted in the insecurity that she has when she loses some authority over a certain division. And so that's where, when you understand where some people are coming from, you're able to then approach the problem solving differently, because now you can talk about what's really driving your thoughts here. What's really driving you to put your stake in the ground so hard on this topic? Because it's really not that significant, but the emphasis that you're putting on it is disproportionate to really the consequence of this. So tell me, why do you feel that way? Right? And it's typically insecurity.
Thanks for sharing that. And so next, let's talk about the impact of the employer on employees and how that starts to impact the employee's family. I think that's something often not talked about.
You know, Michael, it is something that it took me some time to develop. And what I needed to develop was an understanding that, because my home life in my 20s, at the time when tragedy struck us, my home life was really solid. We were happy. Our careers were going well, my wife and I. So everything was great. And so I had this crazy idea that employees needed to leave their personal problems at home and come into work and be 100% focused on work. Now, that doesn't sound unnatural to be focused on work when you're there. Certainly, if you're in the medical field, you have the responsibility, lives in your hands. You've got to be very focused. But if I create a work environment that is adding to your tensions, adding to the negativity in your home life, it's really hard for me to demand and expect for you to perform at the highest level when the mental space that we're bringing you into professionally is so negative. And so at some point, we recognize it's just this circle of continuous loop of waking up with a bad frame of mind because your home life is difficult, bringing that energy into work, creating challenges and tensions at work, increasing your negativity, bringing that back into your home, taking that negativity from work, maybe now that you have authority at home as a mother or father, and you take that out in some abusive ways to your spouse or to your children, and then create more problems at home, right? And bring it into work, creating more problems at work. It's just a vicious cycle. So as an employer, the only responsible thing for me to do is to acknowledge that I need my employees to have a healthy life and a happy life and a positive life outside of work so that they can bring that energy into our company and pour that into other employees and pour that into our customers and pour that into their work. And in turn, I have to then create an environment at work where I'm acknowledging them and recognizing them for their positivity and their contributions. And I'm making them even feel better financially and from a appreciation standpoint and a career growth standpoint so that they head home even more positive, right? And creating more positivity at home. You know, we have one mind and one heart, and that same mind and heart, we bring it to work and we bring it home. And just like we could say at work that it's not okay for you to bring your personal problems into your workspace, your family too could say it's not okay for you to bring your work problems into our family space. Right? It's fair game. If it's played on one side, it could be played on the other. And when I say this, it's never about not being accountable for high quality work and being focused at work. You got to be focused at work. Realistic enough to realize that if you're at a really dark place at home, I've seen that impact people's work. And so we've had to kind of hit the pause button and say, wait a minute, something's different. You're off today. Do you want to talk about it? No, I don't want to talk about it. I just want to do my job. Well, I'd love that if you were doing your job well, but right now you're not. So what can we do to help with that? And I'm not saying an employer has to take on the problems of someone's home life. I'm just saying that you need to be cognizant of it and aware so that you don't exacerbate those, because when you make things worse at home, it's going to come back to bite you at work.
Yeah, I think you touched on a point where it's all related. I think I've heard you in different interviews saying there's no work-life balance. It's just all life. And I think that's true. You can have these positive feedback loops or you could have these negative feedback loops, but you can't ignore that the two influence each other. So thanks for sharing that.
Especially in our environment today where so many people are working from home. You know, the commute home is oftentimes when people would say, you know, I don't mind, I have a 30-minute commute or an hour commute because I'm able to clear my mind from my work day. I'm able to listen to some music, whatever that might be. And then I can walk into my house and I've got a clear head and I'm ready to be a dad or be a mom. Well, now when your commute might be from a spare bedroom to the kitchen, right? And it's 20 steps, you don't have time to get your head right. Right? And you got kids and spouse greeting you as you're walking out of that spare bedroom, your home office. So, exactly. You know, it's a different work world today that we've got to be mindful of that home space and workspace oftentimes are one now.
Right. And so there's a quote by Peter Drucker, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast." And I think one thing that you're known for is building great company cultures. Can you share with us how you did that in the past? I know in your book you had mentioned, I believe the program was called the Forward Focus Program at your company. Can you share more about that?
Absolutely. And I love his quote there because, you know, we think about output and performance as ultimately what we need to get, but we forget about the culture that we need to create in order to make those outcomes possible and achievable. And so I'm just a huge believer in that. And back when I put this as a chapter in my book, When our personal tragedy hit at home, it was when I realized that my work life had to change, because getting out of bed was a struggle for my wife and for me. So coming into work, my head was in such a dark place that I couldn't handle the normal work pressures, because the way things were dealt with disrespectfully and aggressively that I tolerated before as, people at work, it's pressure. They're dealing with it the best they can. I saw it in a very different light when I was unstable. And so forward focus for me, Michael, was about the forward thinking is what I like about myself. It's where my talents and skills are. It's where solutions live. It's where I value the coworkers around me, that together as a team, we're going to achieve the desired results. Backward thinking is my insecurities, what I don't like about myself. Others are always to blame. That's where the problems exist. And in backward thinking, you can't even think of solutions because you're in such a negative headspace. And so I created a program called Forward Focus, where I made very clear to the employees that over the course of 1 year, we were going to have a lot of training and reading material about changing the culture in our company so that our hearts were more connected to each other, more connected to our customers, so that we could ultimately serve them better. And forward focused thinking was going to be about solutions and what we liked about each other. And so if you want to start a conversation with who's at fault and why they're terrible and why they're making everything difficult, there was just no room for that discussion in our company. You were sent out of a room and asked, if you really want to talk about this, think about the right way to approach it with forward focused thinking, and I'm happy to engage. But you want to bring to me as a manager a problem and dump it on my door without a solution or 3 solution options, and you just want to complain about it? We're not doing it. So when we just wiped all that conversation out and someone came in and said, hey, we're having a challenge. I've identified 3 possible solutions on how we can fix it and make an impact. And here's the right people that I think that can do it. And here's the skills that we have to do it. I sit there with a smile on my face like, man, that's no problem. You've got 3 awesome options there. You pick the one that works best, right? So it's that changed the culture. And in doing that, the business tripled. The bottom line was never better in our company's history. And it was a dramatic change in 1 year with a change in culture.
A couple of points that I found interesting about that was, first, it changes the mindset of how people approach the problem. Number 2, it changes how people communicate with each other from a place of, hey, let's just, complain about this thing versus, all right, let's figure out solutions around it. And then number 3, you're starting to empower people to say, well, hey, here are the options. Make the decision from there. So I think that's really powerful how you did that. All right, Johnny. So as you were talking about that culture shift, that happened during a very difficult time in your life. So I think now's the perfect time to transition the conversation over to your book titled Life's Hard, But I'll Be Okay, which I think is one of the most vulnerable and candid accounts of various tragic events in your life and how you came to overcome those challenges. And so the foreword of your book is written by Dr. Kubang, and he had a quote in there that said, adversity can lead to abundance. And so a question I have is, how did you know you were ready to share all of those challenges? Because you really do have an unbelievable story and a series of events that, if I were in your shoes, I would find it very difficult to share so publicly and openly about. So I'm curious, how did you know you were ready to share all that?
We had heard over the years, Michael, when people heard our story, that it really is hard to believe, and the comments that come back in reviews, that it is a book that's hard to put down. It's almost a page turner. It's interesting because when you're living it, you certainly don't want to be living a life that is that shocking and difficult. But I like that comment because the first time I heard that, I thought, that stings a little bit, that our life was so challenging that somebody couldn't put it down because they just had to find out what happened next. But I love that in a way that people felt compelled because they knew that there was hope involved. And, the subtitle of the book is The Power of Hope, Emerging Through Pain and Learning to Live with Gratitude. So they knew that there was something there that was going to get better. And I realized, what? We're all seeking that. And so I felt really the responsibility to share it because we heard so many people comment that it really should be a book, that I knew it would help people. And if I did it right, if I wrote it thoughtfully and carefully and very honestly and sharing my own feelings, I felt that it could be impactful. And so in doing it and talking about it, I wanted it done, but sitting down to write it was actually hard. And it was because of a lot of emotions we were going back to. And it was really the pushing from my kids. Our kids were very clear that, Dad, you said you were going to write a book. Now you're repurposed. You have more time. Why don't you do it? The story needs told. And so that gave me a lot of strength to do it, is, chronicling it for my kids to see the full story in writing, although they, certainly heard the story over the years, and then to know I could help people. And the feedback has been so overwhelming and so positive, men and women alike. It's just been all age groups in all challenge situations, whether it's divorce or financial troubles or medical issues or death, loss of a loved one, what work challenges. Our story just serves as a backdrop for the power of hope and emerging through pain and learning to live with gratitude. And you can apply those 3 sentences to any situation in your life.
And Johnny, not to give any spoiler alerts, but could you give kind of a quick summary about what the book is about and maybe some of the events that happened in it?
Sure. Our book is about our journey for a family and the difficulties that we experienced through unexplained infertility that lasted for years. And so as somebody that values family, that really defined my success as being a good husband, being a good father, creating that family environment that I was blessed that I came from. When we couldn't have children, our purpose in life, as I spoke about earlier, was really called to question. And I really felt that I was meant to be a dad, and it just wasn't happening. So it talks through that. But then we did have triplets after years of trying, and we had 2 sons and a daughter that passed away. And what we thought was a problem before, we had now seen on a whole new scale and a new scope, that it was hard to put into context the loss that we felt and the future that we lost and the darkness that we were in. And then more and more challenges continued for us to become parents that required a lot of times to check our guts, to check our strength and resolve and look at each other and remaining committed. It was challenging as hell, but it was a high time of faith in our lives, maybe the highest. And in a time that, as I look back, I'm so grateful for those struggles. I'm so grateful for the life that Nicholas, Mary, and Peter had. In the short time that they were with us, we came to terms that that could be enough. Because, in this world, Michael, we all want more. We want more money. We want more love. We want more food. We want more abundance. We want more things. And we want more time with people that we care about. And what do you do when you have to just accept and say, I'm not going to get more time? Do you live in regret and anger, hostility, or do you live in gratitude? And we just were not going to live in regret. And so for us, we lived in gratitude for the time that they were alive and the beautiful time that we had of the 5 of us in a hospital, in a very difficult setting where we knew they were dying, but there was a lot of beauty still there. And so in our struggles, if you're willing to look around, there is beauty around you. There are rewards for the trials, but you got to look for them. And when you see them, you got to pull them in and hold on to those versus the darkness.
And Johnny, when you mention the loss of your triplets, and that's just one of many events you cover in your book, I could see any of those events causing someone to start some sort of downward spiral and not really feel like there's a light at the end of the tunnel. What advice would you give to someone who maybe is going through a severe loss or struggle right now, and how can they hang on to that hope?
I would bring it all in, feel all the emotions, understand how appropriate the emotions of sadness and despair and everything that goes with grief. It's real and you need to experience it. We got to the point of feeling grateful. And the way that we got there, Michael, is because sitting in that darkness, it was too much for us to handle. We simply couldn't. So unless we were going to bring in vices of drugs or alcohol or, other things that were unhealthy for us, which we weren't willing to do, we needed to find what could we cling to. And so I would say experience it, feel it, seek help, allow yourself the time to grieve, but then at some point start restricting the amount of time that you're grieving. Where I'm going to spend 30 minutes in tears today. I'm not going to sit and cry for hours in bed. I'm going to push myself and get out of bed. And we had so many days where we had to push one another or push ourselves to say, let's go. You can't stay in this mindset. And so that's the hardest part, is just physically getting up. And a great countdown. Mel Robbins does so many great things along this line: 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go. Just get up and go. I wish that the readiness and available of that material in podcasts was available to us back then. It was in book form, but to have that playing in your car or as you're running and working out, it's very different today. And so embrace all of those is what I would really tell you to do. And then at some point you make up your mind and you say, I'm just not going to stay in this place anymore. I won't do it. And then you start working your way out.
A few points I want to highlight that came from your book was around 4 strategies for resilience from Dr. Barb Fordyce. And so number 1 was wellness related to self-care and daily gratitude. Number 2 was around social support, making sure you're investing in the relationships you have, not being shy to reach out to other people. Number 3 was healthy thinking, which is staying rational and balanced. That what's happening to you now or has happened to you is not an indicator of how your future will go. And number 4 was around creating positive meaning. Is there anything else you would like to add to that?
One of my favorite parts in the book is the afterword that Dr. Fordyce wrote. And she, really does a beautiful job of walking through all the cognitive behavioral therapies that she taught us in a way to reframe our thoughts. So that's what I want to add in there, is the reframing of thoughts. So when you are practicing wellness and you're surrounding yourself by the right people that are lifting you up, and you're doing all those steps in the 4 that you mentioned, there's so much power in reframing our thoughts. And I just went through a reframing thought example when I said about the time that we had with them. Am I going to be grateful for it, or am I going to always say it wasn't enough? And for the first few years, I was stuck on it wasn't enough. And it just feels awful. So I reframed those thoughts to what we had, the time we had. It was beautiful. It was just the 5 of us. The world was blocked out. It was just the 5 of us in that hospital, loving each other, holding them feeling the amazing amount of love that their mom and I had for them. And their life on earth was all love. And that's amazing. So imagine your life just purely existing in only love. Not many people get that. And our kids did. And so as we think about that, we understand the power that we have to reframe, to take a tough topic and find another way to look at it that works for you as opposed to working against you. And Dr. Fordyce in the afterword writes about so many good practices that you can use, and she references back to the story. And so that's one of my favorite parts of the book is the psychological well-being that you get from good, tried and true programs that change your mindset.
That was such a powerful and deep example when you talked about reframing, especially that experience with your triplets. Thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
Next, I want to talk about managing yourself. So, Johnny, you say that leadership starts with yourself. What are some of the ways you've applied that for yourself throughout your life?
Michael, I realized that for myself, I needed to have my life in order before I could go out there and try to make an impact on myself. John Maxwell talks about the idea that the hardest person to lead is yourself. And the reason for that is because we judge ourselves by our intentions, but we judge others by their actions. And when you live in that way of giving yourself the break because my intentions were good, you might not have your house in order, and you might have a lot of messes in your life that you're putting out there in your leadership. And you're not really judging yourself by your actions. And so I want to make sure that when I judge myself on what my actions are, how am I treating people? How am I engaging with people? What's my success rate for the decisions that I make and the results that we get? When I focus there, I'm in such a better place of just worrying about what's going on right around me and making sure that I'm in the right place so I could positively impact other people. And so many leaders don't recognize the hot mess that they are and the whirlwind that they are when they blow through the office, creating chaos and a storm behind them, and the impact that they're making on other people. So that's why you really have to know yourself first. You have to know what people like about you, what people don't like about you, what is effective in your communication styles, what's ineffective. And I think once you do know those things, you're in a much better position to act responsibly and get the outcomes and desires that you need, that your company requires of you, that is the mission of your company, once you really understand the way that you approach things. So you got to get your house in order first before you go worrying about giving other people advice.
Oftentimes, high performers can also be very critical of themselves. They have that inner voice that sometimes is pushing them a bit too hard. And so how do you manage that for yourself?
Boy, that's one, Michael, that I've had a lot of internal struggle with because I am very self-critical. There's a quote that my dad always used to say, and I loved my dad so much and had so much respect for him personally and professionally. He would say that he hates making mistakes. And so one side of me looks at that and says, I really get that. Who wants to make a mistake? So that makes me sharper. It makes me more focused. It makes me more intentional about my actions. That's awesome. But then I think about that statement, I hate making mistakes. And I realize how limiting that statement is and how punishing it is, because if it's top of mind, my thought is on my mistakes versus on the process. And so for me, I needed to find a balance because my self-talk is pretty harsh. It is not something that I could really say to people that I've mastered. I work really hard at trying to talk to myself better. I would never allow anyone else to talk to me the way that I talk to me. I would put a stop to that real quickly because I have self-respect. Yet I lose that self-respect when it's myself talking to myself. And so being hard on yourself, I think there's values to that, right? Some people, I challenge them to say, take a good, honest look in the mirror and recognize the flaws that you have. That message is for somebody that really thinks that their actions are flawless, that they're so not aware of themselves that what they're putting out there is offensive and it's hurtful and it's hurting the organization, they need an honest look in the mirror, and they need somebody telling them their flaws if they can't see them. So there's that extreme. And then there's the other extreme where I am, where I don't give myself a lot of breaks. I don't give myself any breaks. And I replay in my mind a mistake that I made, and I don't let it go well. And man, I want to improve that. And I try every day. And I try to work on the voices inside my head. And as I put in the book, I'm an active thinker, and that's my way of saying I have anxiety. I worry about things. I worry about people. I worry about situations. And in doing that, it puts me at a time too often where I filled my mind with that negativity and I direct it inward. I'm pretty good at not directing it outward, but it's really damaging on me. And so I've been working on that more now than ever. Before, I think I tolerated it. And it was really my daughter Bella that challenged me that we don't have to live this way, because she does the same thing. And a few years ago, she said that to me, and now I'm working on changing it. Before that, I thought, that's just how I am. That's just my self-talk. It's got to change.
Right. Yeah, that level of self-criticism can definitely be productive in some capacities to keep stoking that fire, that drive. Also, just striving for excellence usually requires that. But the double edge of that sword is, it can become quite damaging and give a mental toll as well.
That's right. My parents always said to me, anything to an extreme is bad.
Right.
Right. And so, right in the middle of the road on some topics, just don't go too far either way, too hard on yourself or too easy on yourself. Either extreme is bad.
Right. Throughout your career, I'm curious, how have you been able to manage yourself with going hard at work, but then showing up back at home to your family with the same level of enthusiasm?
That's the struggle we all have, right? That's the classic struggle of that balance between the two worlds, right? And again, it's one mind, one heart, one life. So we've got to master that. I'd say there's times that I did it really well. And other times that I didn't. Other times that I let my family down because I would take calls when I shouldn't have taken calls. If we were at the dinner table and I knew someone was going, this is going to be quick. I played those games. Today I have a much better balance about that, where people know how committed I am and know my heart. So if I don't take the call or I don't reply to the text immediately, they know that I will. My actions have proven that. And so I wish when I was younger, I would have relied on people knowing me and knowing that I'm going to readily be available for them. But it's not 24/7 always. It will be on a better timeline. And so I get the struggle that we all have there to find that time of being fully present. But when you care enough about the other people more than yourself, that's when you can be more present. When you realize the negative impact it's having on them when you're physically there and not mentally there, the people that love you and respect you and care about you, that's what will get you to change. Because if it's about you getting more fun in that social environment or that family environment, you might say, no, my choice is more work because I want more money. I want more power. I want more success. But they don't need that from you all the time. They need it from you sometime, for sure. But in those moments, they need you personally there. And if you just rely on what feels good to you, you're not going to be there for them. So once you put them as the priority, that will motivate you to do it.
The last topic I'd like to cover here is around mentors. And so one thing I noticed throughout your book was maybe one of your first mentors was your dad, and you've had great relationships all around you. And so throughout your life, and maybe as advice for our listeners here, how would you recommend somebody find great mentors, and how have they impacted your life?
First of all, seek them out, right? And And, if you ask someone to be your mentor, that might sound like a lifelong commitment. Ask somebody for mentorship on a topic and a little bit of time. And I think you're going to find so many people that are willing to do that. So many people want to help young people kind of clear up a thought in their mind. And so I know for me, the value that I've seen, Michael, in good people that I respected, that were mentoring me, and they might not have even known it. One gentleman in particular, I think about that. He did a talk on mentorship and how important it is to have a good mentor in your life. And I went up to him after his talk and I asked if he would be my mentor. And his name's Paul Bishop, an incredibly wise man, very successful businessman, amazing husband and father, the generation above me and my dad's generation. And he accepted that. And I was respectful. I didn't take a ton of his time, but I was very mindful that the man had lived through challenges that I had not yet even known they were coming my way. And I wanted that wisdom. And so I've been known to say that the term authentic self today is so popular. I say, I don't even know who my authentic self is, because I am the sum of so many great people that have come into my life, of the parts that they left with me, their wisdom, the way that they engaged, the way that they listened, the way that they asked questions, the way that they cared. There's so much of that I've taken from them and brought into me and said, I want to eject that out. I want to project that. And so when I brought that in, now is that authentically me, or is some of that Paul that I saw from him and I brought in? And so my authentic self, I don't know who that is. I know who the guy is right now presenting to you. And he is a compilation of good things that people have done, bad things that people have done, that I wanted to bring in so that I could make my mark and help people.
So true for all of us. Well, Johnny, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I feel like we covered such a wide variety of topics. Really enjoyed getting to know you, understand your story. And I think this will be an episode our listeners really enjoy. So thank you for coming on the show and sharing all your knowledge.
You're welcome. It was an honor to be here with you, Michael. And thanks for the work that you're doing out there.